In today's episode, there will be imagery of crime scenes and human remains. So if you aren't in the headspace for these topics today, please be kind to your mind, and I'll see you in the next one. Welcome back to Grim and Whim. Today, we will be diving into a really interesting cold case that was previously a case with unidentified victims. They were simply named the Sumter County Does, or Jock Doe and Jane Doe. Now, thankfully, the victims have been identified and linked to missing persons cases, but the problem remains. We still don't know who was responsible for these gruesome murders and why did they happen. So let's begin by looking at the case timeline and what was initially known about the victims. The case begins in the early morning on August 9th, 1976, when two unidentified murder victims were found on a secluded dirt road between I-95 and Lynch's River Road in Sumter County, South Carolina. At 6:20 a.m., a trucker named Martin Durant found the bodies and contacted Charles Graham, an employee at a nearby store, who then immediately contacted the police. The male victim had been shot 3 times in the upper chest, and the female victim was shot in the upper chest and through the neck. It appears that the victims were murdered execution style. The weapon was believed to be a .357 caliber revolver, and based on their belongings, it appeared that the two had been traveling throughout the United States before meeting this terrible fate in South Carolina. The victims may have had their vehicle hijacked, possibly by a stranger or maybe somebody that they were traveling with. The male victim was a white man between the ages of 18 and 30, with an olive complexion, brown shoulder-length hair, brown eyes, and very distinctive bushy eyebrows. He stood over 6 feet tall, weighed around 150 pounds, and had extensive dental work done, which may indicate that he had a higher socioeconomic status. The man also had some distinctive scars, including a 4-inch appendectomy scar and various scars on his back and shoulders, which indicated that he may have been involved in some kind of contact sport, maybe football or soccer, basketball, something like that. He was wearing faded Levi brand jeans and a red t-shirt with Coors American Light Beer on the front and Camel Challenger GT Sebring 75 on the back, along with a Snoopy design. He wore no underwear and carried a pack of Grant's truck stop matches in his pocket. The matches are believed to have come from a Grant's truck stop somewhere in the Midwest, but there are many of them, and so it was pretty difficult to figure out exactly which one. He wore a yellow gold Belova Accutron, which is a type of watch, and it had a Twistoflex band bearing the serial number H918803. Using the serial number, investigators were able to determine that Belova had made the watch in 1968. However, when the Belova company downsized in the early 1970s, they destroyed many of their records. So there was no way to figure out exactly where the victim's watch was manufactured and bought. The man was also wearing a 14-karat gold ring set with a gray star sapphire stone. The initials JPF were engraved inside the ring. Both the ring and the watch were pretty expensive, so along with the dental records, it did indicate that he may have come from a wealthy family. The female victim was also white, with a similar olive complexion, and was believed to be between 18 to 25 years old. Because the victims looked so similar, investigators initially believed that perhaps the pair were siblings or somehow related. She was 5'5" and about 100 pounds, with reddish-brown, shoulder-length hair and blue-gray eyes. She had two distinctive moles on the left side of her face near her mouth. The coroner noted that the woman had unusually long but natural eyelashes. Similar to the man, she also had extensive dental work done. She had no surgical scars, had never been pregnant, and her legs had not been shaved. She was wearing a white muslin blouse over a pink halter top. She wore blue denim cutoff shorts and a floral print scarf tied around her waist as a belt. She wore Stride Right brand wedge-heeled sandals that were lavender and hot pink. She was also wearing 3 rings, including a black oblong stone with tiny turquoise chips embedded in it, another ring in a feather shape with coral and turquoise stones, and a third ring that was pretty simple, just a simple metal band with blue stones. These rings appeared to be authentic, handmade Native American or possibly Mexican jewelry. And like the man, the female victim was also not wearing underwear. The 2 victims were given the names Jock Doe and Jane Doe, and the authorities believed that the man's name likely did start with a J, since the initials JPF were engraved inside the man's ring. Now, typically, it's usually Jane Doe for a female and John Doe for a male victim. However, the male victim was referred to as Jock Doe, which may have originated from the French name Jock. And a man who claimed that he had met the victim stated that he was told by this male victim that his name was Jock and that he had left his Canadian family with his girlfriend. The man also claimed that Jock Doe had also talked about that his father was a well-known doctor and that he came from a wealthy family, which does kind of make some sense considering the wealthy type of jewelry and accessories that the man was wearing, and then also the extensive dental work. Despite the fact that the descriptions of Jock and Jane Doe, as well as their sketches of their faces and their dental information and fingerprints, they were distributed across the United States, for some reason, nobody was able to recognize the 2. The pair's bodies were kept at a local funeral home in the hopes that someone would identify them, and people did flock from all across the country to inquire about them, and this included several parents of young runaways. However, nobody was able to identify them. The bodies remained on display until August 14, 1977, which was 1 year and 5 days after their bodies were found. And they were interred in Bethel United Methodist Church Cemetery in Oswego, South Carolina. Hundreds of people attended the funeral service, and law enforcement agencies raised several $100s to pay the funeral home for caring for these unnamed victims. They were buried with grave markings reading male unknown and female unknown. Decades later, in 2007, the bodies were exhumed to obtain DNA information, and DNA testing did show that the pair were in no way related, despite their resemblances. The DNA Doe Project was recruited in July 2019 to assist in identifying the pair, and $2,300 was donated to fund the extraction of usable DNA profiles from bone marrow for genetic testing. On October 12, 2020, they released the results from the genetic testing of the victims' ancestral backgrounds. However, it wasn't until January 19, 2021, that both victims were finally identified. The man was named James Freund, and the woman was Pamela Buckley. James Freund was born in 1946 in Fitchburg, Massachusetts, and he disappeared on December 25, 1975, from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. He was murdered on August 9th, 1976. And the time in between when he disappeared from Pennsylvania and then was later found dead in South Carolina, that gap of time is still a mystery. He was at one point married to a woman named Charlene Albright, and they got married in 1965 but separated 10 years later in 1975. Not much else was found on James, and it is a mystery why he suddenly up and left his life in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Pamela Buckley's life is also a bit of a mystery, and it's unclear why she left and disappeared from her home in Colorado Springs, Colorado in December 1975, only to be found murdered on August 19th, 1976 in South Carolina. And she was born on December 16th, 1951 in Redwood County, Minnesota. She was also married to a man named Gary Clifford Kennel, and they got married in 1972, and then their marriage ended in 1976. She was reported missing in December 1975. However, unlike James, who went missing and was reported missing on Christmas Day in 1975, it isn't clear what specific day that Pamela disappeared. It just says December 1975. Let's now look into some theories about who may have been responsible for the murder of the now identified Sumter County Jock and Jane Doe. Now that we finally have the names for these previously unidentified murder victims, what is still unknown is who took their lives and what was their motive for doing so. Was it a random killing or something more? Many believe that this could have been a carjacking gone wrong situation, potentially by a serial killer working in the area. However, it is also a possibility that maybe they were traveling with someone else, and that person committed the murder. There has even been speculation that a serial killer named Henry Lee Lucas could have been responsible for the murders. And Lucas told the police that he had been in South Carolina the day the victims died, but police were skeptical of his claims. Apparently, the man was known to give false confessions and insert himself in cases. And so, sadly, because of this, I don't think they took his claims very seriously. And this is something that people do. I've seen this quite a bit in true crime, where people will involve themselves in cases for whatever reason. I don't know if it's for notoriety or just to be part of the action or what, but people will insert themselves in a true crime case claiming to know information or claiming to be involved in the murder or the disappearance. And because this man had a history of doing this, the authorities didn't take his claims very seriously. And unfortunately, he was never charged with the crime, and he did die in 2001 due to heart failure. So there really is no way to verify if these claims were true. A year following the discovery of the bodies, a man named Lonnie George Henry was arrested in Latta, South Carolina for drunk driving. In his car was a revolver, and it was proven to be the same type of revolver that was the murder weapon in the Sumter County Jock and Jane Doe case. The man was located, but he couldn't be charged with anything due to insufficient evidence, and he eventually passed away in 1982. And unfortunately, that's sort of where the case ends. There hasn't been any other potential leads or persons of interest or anything for the authorities to follow up on. And also, unfortunately, even if we were to figure out some sort of lead or gain a person of interest, it's really unlikely that the person is still alive today. And thankfully, the victims were at least identified, and we are able to know their names and understand a little bit about who they were, despite there still being quite a huge mystery around what they were doing the time of their disappearance and why they left, or if they didn't leave on their own accords, if there was something else that happened that forced them to leave. It's really unknown what exactly happened and whether or not they were traveling together or if they just met along the way. It's really confusing, but at least the family and loved ones, they are able to know what happened to them. And right now, that might be as much closure as we will get on this case. If you have any information about the case, you can contact the Sumter County Sheriff's Office at 803-436-2000, and I will put all of that in the description box below. But with all that being said, thank you so much for listening. Be safe, and I'll see you in the next one.